So welcome everyone, and especially the new members who've not attended a meeting before. I'd just quickly explain, we don't give medical advice, we don't sort of advise on treatment or medication because we are not trained to do so, but we cover everything else. So everything else in our lives, most things in our lives are affected by a balance condition. We're there to talk about, discuss, share, help, support. So that covers an awful lot of ground. You are in brilliant company because at last you're with a group of people who don't think you're crazy, who won't go around saying, but you look really well. There can't be anything wrong with you. People who understand why often you are reduced to tears because life is so challenging. The changes can be completely and utterly devastating, and we all understand that. We also understand the challenges of the unpredictability in many of the conditions, where one day is great, the next minute is traumatic, and there's very little to predict that. And we understand how that plays with your mind and can make you a prisoner in your own home, can rip all the confidence away from you, from just going down to a shop to socializing to maintaining your job. So you are in very good company. We are totally aware of all these issues, and what we're here to do is not dwell upon that and not roll about in our sorrow and grief. What we're here to do is turn that into a positive and find ways that we can begin to escape the clutches of those conditions, to find ways where we can get on top of those conditions and get to a better place. So that's what we're about. The biggest thing you can do as a new member, two things really: watch as many of the past meeting videos as you can, because there is something in there for everyone. And even a refresher now and again for those of us that have been in the meetings can help, because there's so many little details we can forget. And the second thing, consider joining our member-to-member contact network, where you have to opt in. We share your email and or phone number with fellow members who've opted in. Some of our members have made fantastic friendships with other members that I think they'll keep for the rest of their lives. But at the very least, you get an opportunity to chat with other people just like you at any time. So you don't need to wait for this 8-weekly meeting. So I really urge you to think of doing that. Today, there's no pressure for anyone to do anything. You sit back, literally relax, I think, later with Debbie will be one of the things to do. And I think this is going to be a really, really good meeting from what I've seen, what Debbie does and her ideas. And as ever, just be completely open, be ready to participate and ask any questions you want, and let's get the best out of this. So I think now, Debbie, I'm going to hand over to you. If you can tell us about yourself and then take us through the presentation. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you for that very good introduction. And when I met Kevin, I could instantly see that what his group and you guys all do is just completely singing from the same hymn sheet as myself, and what I kind of teach to the patients that I see. So yeah, living well with, and life in balance and balance in life. And that doesn't necessarily need to mean in the absence of dizziness or imbalance. You can have a full and active life even if you still have symptoms of dizziness, whether they're constant low level dizziness, whether they come and go, or whether you haven't had one for a number of years, but you're a little bit worried about what happens if sort of symptoms come back. And so what I'm going to talk about is mindfulness in particular, which can be used with all these conditions, really, and follows on very nicely to what Dr. Lynette Simpson has talked on a couple of occasions about. And if you haven't watched that podcast, I would really suggest, which is kind of acceptance commitment therapy type approach, and mindfulness is part of acceptance and commitment therapy and is totally about living well with. And so that is very, very useful, and she's given some very good resources. So I was told to talk a little bit about me. I'm quite keen on, I'm not an artist, but I'm quite keen on the use of art to sort of depict various things, and that's probably because I'm so useless with words. And I like to kind of think what people may say if I say maybe this is 3 pictures which kind of give a flavour of who I am and what I am. So, oh, someone's just screen shared. Mrs. Westwood, could you maybe stop screen sharing because people can't see mine now? Kevin Kelly. So anyway, my background is that Mrs. Westwood? Yep. Are you able, because my can everyone see my presentation? Because I can't now.
No. Bimla, can you know, under your icons at the bottom, can you see the share screen one? Can you click off it for us?
What do I do? Oh, right, okay.
So click it off so it goes into like a grey mode.
I can hear.
Have you done that?
Is it done now?
Debbie, can you try and share your screen again?
Right.
Okay, there we go.
Right. Bimla, can you just turn your microphone on to mute for me, please, sweetheart?
Say that again.
Can you turn your microphone off for us, please, and put it on mute? Fabulous, thank you so much. Debbie, you should be good to go.
Thank you. Oh, Zoom's so complicated, isn't it? I hate Zoom. I prefer coming and talking to people face to face. But I think the good thing about Zoom is that I see that we've got some people from quite far away. Did I see New York? So that is the benefit. So one of the philosophies of mindfulness is to dwell on the positive. And so there are lots of good things about Zoom. Anyway, so 3 photos which sort of give a taste of me. I've helped patients with dizziness for many, many years now. I'm a clinical scientist in audiology. I did an MSc in that at Southampton. I then did my training at Reading, Royal Berkshire Hospital. I then led the balance team at Reading for many, many years. And kind of towards the end of that time, I came to mindfulness. And I've suffered in the past from a bit of recurrent depression. And mindfulness is now quite a good evidence-based technique for helping with recurrent depression. And so very innovatively, actually, for that time, they did suggest this, and I wasn't at all convinced. And but I thought, okay, I need to give this a go. And I remember, because I also liked my kayaking on the Thames at that time. And I remember actually, it used to be on a Wednesday evening, and the weather was always beautiful. And I actually much would have preferred to be out on in a kayak. So I remember feeling quite cross by the whole thing, and I didn't sort of really take to it. But at that time I thought, actually this may be quite good for my patients with dizziness. And so I went from there, and at the end of, when you've done a mindfulness course, they ask you to write a letter about all the benefits that you might see, and they send it to you at a time after. And so the course ended, I completely stopped my practice, went kayaking, and then like 3-6 months later, I got this letter, and I thought, oh, you know, who's this from? Because you know, when you kind of, I recognized the writing, but I couldn't place it because it was mine. How often do you write a letter to yourself? And I opened it and it said, "Dear Debbie, you know mindfulness is actually really good for you. I bet you've stopped. Why don't you try and rekindle your practice?" And it went from there, really. And I've continued ever since. I trained to become a mindfulness teacher. And over the years, I progressively used mindfulness techniques in lots of sort of different ways. Initially supporting people, because I wasn't a mindfulness teacher, with the Mindfulness for Health Breathworks book. And then I did the Breathworks course, trained to become a teacher. Pre-pandemic, if we can remember pre-pandemic, I started to lead some Mindfulness for Health course tailored to dizziness with real life people, you know, that you could touch in the room. Not that I touched them, but you know what I mean. And I loved that. And then, of course, you know, the pandemic hit, and well, for quite a lot of time, I wasn't able to see patients. And then we've started up, and we're not allowed to do courses still. So a lot of it's gone online. But I now see patients face to face, but I kind of give more of an individualized approach. And along with that, 7 years ago, I moved up to Manchester to take up a lectureship post at Manchester University. So now my university work is teaching everyone about dizziness, BSc, MSc, doctoral level students, their clinical students, and also my clinical work is predominantly with patients with chronic dizziness. So that's me. So this session then, I want to be really interactive. I don't just want me to talk at you. So at any time, stop, raise your hand. People know how to raise their hand, or put things in the chat box. And Kelly, if you could maybe, just as I'm talking, let me know, because it's just much better for you to share your experiences. And I'm just going to talk a little bit about what mindfulness is and how it potentially could help you. Then I've built over the years a sort of model that I use for people with persistent dizziness. And I will go through a little bit about that. And I think the good thing is about what I do is most people are not mindfulness teachers, so you're not really going to be able to access this particularly well from anywhere, but there's lots of sort of individual techniques that you may find useful as a standalone technique, or when I teach other clinicians about it, again, I've sort of said, you know, you can use these as standalone techniques. So you might find those useful. How can I access resources? And yeah, just like stop me. So questions don't need to be at the end. And I find they're sort of much better, you know, because what happens is you think, oh, I want to ask that. And then at the end, you're sort of forgotten if you're anything like me. And so just stick your hand up. And then, you know, probably other people are thinking about that question, or maybe something that I've not made completely clear. Stop me then, yeah, raise your hand or sort of put a comment. Is that okay with everyone, yeah? Okay. So I would say that I generally treat people, mindfulness is useful for every single one of us on this planet, I believe. You don't need to have a health condition, you don't need to be stressed. It's a way of life that I would advocate to anyone, but it does also appear to be particularly good for people with chronic health problems. And so that is generally what I teach to patients within the NHS. And so I generally use it, because limited funds in the NHS, for people with persistent dizziness. And so does anyone want to share just a few symptoms that they experience in the chat box? Because we'll see that people experience a whole wide range of symptoms. Does anyone? Okay. So Claire's been doing breathing videos from Instagram. What symptoms do you experience? Anyone? Kevin, what symptoms do you experience?
Well, I'd say generally, talking to a lot of the members, we, as you're aware, there's so many different flavours of balance condition, but typically the most extreme of violent vertigo attacks.
And that's what you experience, is it?
I did, but I touch wood, haven't had one of those nasty things for several years.
So Kevin then used to experience, people are coming through now. Thank you, Kevin.
Yeah.
So this is the other thing, you know, things can change over time. So Kevin used to experience vertigo, but he hasn't for quite some time. And it's important that we don't feel that this dizziness, whatever we experience, is a life sentence. Sandra, brain spinning. John, cognitive issues. Oh, poor Richard had a migraine with aura today. Migraine can be very associated with dizziness. When he was driving, be careful when you drive, Richard, yeah? So we know migraine and dizziness. Simon, brain fog, vertigo and nausea. Nausea, who's this? Nausea, oscillopsia, John. So oscillopsia is where the sort of world moves up and down. Catherine, nausea, dizziness, unsteadiness. 3 days ago, she had attack in a whirling and dissociation. Gosh, so I think immediately what I want to say is people experience dizziness that the lay person understands the term in so many different ways. And these symptoms are really not pleasant. And as Kevin says, on the outside, unless you're vomiting, you may look fine. And so this is the hidden disability of dizziness. I start spinning when I try to meditate. So Debbie, can we come back to that? So that's interesting, and I'm sorry about that. But we'll come back to that. Remind me if I don't, Kevin. Yeah, unsteadiness, balance problems. Yeah, absolutely. Sorry. Kelly said, sorry that Catherine and Richard have had attacks. And I think persistent dizziness at a lower level from Ronan. So thank you for sharing. Blurry vision, tingling. And can you see the great multitude? If I went and sort of surveyed 50 people on the street and said, what do you understand by the word dizziness? They would probably see, oh yeah, dizzy, because dizziness itself is a sort of description, isn't it? They might say spinning, they might not, but they wouldn't expect blurry vision, tingling, head pressure, derealization, insomnia from Richard. And we know that all these, because there are lots of links then between the balance system and learning and memory and sleep centers and the sympathetic nervous system and the vomiting centers. So that explains physiologically why you don't just get the horrible sensation of the room spinning or being off kilter, but you get all these other associated and equally as horrible and sometimes more debilitating symptoms, especially sort of get them in between attacks. So very much the same as you really, but in terms of dizziness, this is what people have. And then all those other symptoms that you've reported, the brain fog, the problem sleeping, the nausea, and in particular, the patients I see are these patients with persistent low-level symptoms. They're all the time, 24/7. And I'm sure that some of you might have that as well. Some of you may have episodes and be symptom-free in between. Some of you may have low-level symptoms, which kind of wax and wane. And others of you may have, and I think this is the worst, bad episode followed by constant low level, bad episode followed by constant low level. And that's tough. That's tough because you never really sort of get rid of it. And all these symptoms are sometimes, actually, you've done very well describing them in words, but do others really understand? You guys understand. Kevin, Kelly understands, yeah? But if you say to your partner or to your loved one, oh, this is, dizzy, oh, well, we all get a bit dizzy, don't we? Just get on with it. Oh my goodness me, we can't just get on with it. Well, you try and get on with it. And so what I did a couple of years ago is I asked people, some of my patients, and we put this on the Meniere Society as well. Meniere Society is a great group which doesn't just look at Meniere's, it sort of helps everyone with dizziness, and good resources there. And so, gosh, this really affected her partner. And actually, I'll admit that it affected me as well. I'm her clinician, and she went through my first dizziness course, and I kind of felt that I understood. And then a couple of years later, she had a relapse. And so I said, oh, do you fancy doing this? And I looked at this and I thought, my gosh, I was quite, I don't know, horrified that the poor woman had started experiencing this again. And we've got some tinnitus in the background there with that sort of electricity. We've got impending doom here, she called it, and as if she was always kind of just keeping her head above water. And then you look at this picture here. Does that look as if Lorraine is experiencing this? So here's another picture, the more sort of psychological aspects. And again, you can't fail. And she calls this, Charlie calls this broken. And yet, look, would you think she's broken? But this is how she feels inside quite often. And these pictures can't fail to influence your clinician, can't fail to influence your family. Lorraine, for example, when she was on a bad day, she put that picture on the fridge just so that her family just knew she was on a bad day, rather than saying, oh, I'm feeling it again, and her family, oh God, because it's quite difficult for relatives as well, especially when you don't quite know what to do. You help your relative. Okay, mum's not feeling great. I'm going to do the washing up. I'm not going to play up. I'm going to, if you're a partner, you know, do something nice for them. Yeah, so not nice. Now, I don't know if anyone suffers from Tomarkin's crisis and they have Meniere's. And this is kind of the end stage Meniere's, where you kind of suddenly might drop to the floor. And it's very frightening. So that's Rog. And then finally, you know, people think, I'm not very good at art, I can't possibly, you know, do that. And I would say, well, you can, because you can always use good old Google images or any other images. Oh, sorry, that seems to be going on. And this is what another patient of mine. So this guy had been detached from his head, from his body, falling into a hole all the time. And this guy did really well with mindfulness. Some of these are my patients and some of these are not. So, you know, have a think whether you would quite enjoy, or it would help your other relatives and friends and colleagues by representing in a piece of art. And I would love to see any if you do. And if you want to see some more, it's always on the Dizziness and Me, Menieres.org. That's the Menieres website. And you don't need to be good at art. And a number of people found it really quite therapeutic. So that's dizziness. And you all come with your own stories, symptoms, ups and downs. And there are ups and downs, aren't there? It isn't hopefully all doom and gloom, although sometimes, especially when you're at the beginning of your journey, all we can see is down, because we've kind of lost something, haven't we? You know, 6 months ago we were fine, and now we have this dizziness and we want to get rid of it and we can't get rid of it. And the more we focus on getting rid of it, ironically, in many cases, when you've got this persistent dizziness, ironically, the more you focus on it, the more likely it is to continue. Now, that's not the same as many of our balance conditions, which have very, very good and successful treatment. So BPPV, benign paroxysmal positional vertigo, very easy to treat in the majority of cases. Vestibular neuritis, which is an inflammation of the nerve, you can give some vestibular rehabilitation. Meniere's, there's lots of things. Vestibular migraine, there's lots of things. But sometimes those medical treatments, rather like in chronic pain, don't always work. And so although I say that mindfulness can be used for anyone, it is particularly useful when those medical treatments are really not getting a hold of it, and especially when we've got kind of low-level symptoms. So people like to put in the chat box what you understand by the word mindful, or the concept of mindfulness. Oh, look, Claire said art, she finds art very mindful. And this is Claire, who I know actually, and jewelry making. So yeah, arts and crafts. Richard says being, where's Richard gone? Being able to relax in the moment. That's what mindfulness means to him. Focusing on the here and now, Simon. coming back again and again to the present. Sandra, do you practice mindfulness? Relaxation, focusing on something else? Pottery, so obviously that's the art that you do, absolutely. So focusing on something else is a very good technique. Andy says, looking after yourself and through relaxation and breathing, being alive and knowing it. Oh, so this is Claire Morgan, who is a person who has suffered from dizziness, but also is a mindfulness teacher. So very good description, Claire. Relax and focus softly. Good. Listening to music sometimes, yeah, as I can only lie down. Yes. So lots, I have a fuzzy idea of mindfulness, yeah. Joey Remini's rock steady approach. Yes, I can recommend that. Let me come to that as well. Let me just write that down. That's a very good resource. I haven't been able to quite master it. Yeah. You see, Joey Remini's rock steady, unless you do the course, it's a fantastic book, but I really feel one needs a bit of support if one's suffering from dizziness. So some lovely ideas there, and thank you for sharing that. And I think really the best way to understand what mindfulness is by actually experiencing it yourself. So I realize that this isn't everyone's cup of tea. So if it's not your cup of tea and fancy a cup of tea, do feel free to go and make a cup of tea. It also may not be appropriate if you suffer from what we call post-traumatic stress disorder, or if you're in the middle of really quite bad anxiety and or depression. So for your safety and for your well-being, maybe you could either just sort of go and do something else or sit and listen, but maybe don't actively participate, because I don't want to make things worse for you. And mindfulness is brilliant, but it's not for everyone. So all this is invitational, and if you start off and you think, oh, this is not for me, absolutely fine, you know, just open your eyes, go and do something else. We'll sort of have probably, depending on how long, what's the time, sort of 5-7 minutes. The other thing is that many of us with dizziness find that when we close our eyes, that our dizziness is worse. So if closing your eyes makes things worse, then keep them open with a sort of soft gaze. The other thing is many of us with dizziness also have tinnitus. And of course, things are going to go quite silent with the exception of my voice. So that might make you focus on your tinnitus, which may not be terribly pleasant. So feel free just to put something quietly on in the background, just so that you've not got that tinnitus blaring away. Okay, so I will lead us through a meditation. I'm going to close my eyes, but as I say, you don't need to. So initially, I'd like you to get into a comfortable posture. A comfortable posture, but one that's nice and sort of upright and alert. And if any time you want to move or wiggle around, that's fine. So let's just come into that this present moment. I bombarded you with quite a lot of information. You might be reflecting on that. You might be thinking, oh, what am I going to have for tea? So let's just come to the here and now. And let's take a few longer breaths. And remembering this is invitational, so if it doesn't work for you, that's absolutely fine. And so let's bring our attention and take our attention all the way down to our feet on the floor. So of course, as patients with people with dizziness, sometimes we feel very dizzy, but actually we have good information from our feet. And so taking our attention initially away from the dizziness and focusing on the stability that the feet give you, rooting and grounding to the floor can be very good. So just attention on your feet and see what you notice in your feet. Are they hot or cold? Tingly? Numb? Or maybe you don't notice anything at all because we don't normally attend to our feet, do we? So just really put that spotlight of attention on your feet. And imagine them grounding you, however dizzy your head is feeling at the moment or does at some point. Attention to the feet on the floor. If your mind wanders at any time, that's normal. Part of being mindful is being aware that your mind wanders. So don't worry about it, just then bring your attention back to whatever I'm talking about, which is your feet rooting and grounding on the floor, the bottom of your feet, the arches of your feet, the tops of your feet, and all the toes. And then take a longer in-breath, and on your out-breath, let your feet dissolve in your awareness. Imagine dissolving them. And bring your attention, let it gradually climb up your legs to your seat on the chair or the sofa, or wherever you are sitting or lying. And again, notice the points of contact between the chair and your seat. Again, fully supporting you. You're not going to fall. You are stable and grounded. Letting the weight of your body be supported by the chair and gravity. So rooted and grounded with your feet firmly planted on the floor and your body supported by the chair beneath you. And then allowing your seat and its support to dissolve in your awareness. And now bringing your attention to the breath. Now, sometimes when we take the attention to the breath, if we have some anxiety, that makes us a little bit anxious. So if that's you, don't focus on the breath if it doesn't work for you, and just focus on either the feet or the seat. If you want to try it, let's just focus on the breath, not breathing, but wherever we feel the breath moving in the body the most. So that may be the belly, or the chest, the top lip, or maybe your nose. So just choose one of those and have that real pointed awareness. Maybe feeling an expansion of the body on the in-breath and a contraction back down on the out-breath. What do you notice in your breath? Is it smooth and steady? Or is it a little bit jagged? And remember, we're just bringing awareness. We're not trying to alter the breath. We're just noticing. Deep or shallow. fast or slow. So just letting the breath breathe itself. We will carry on breathing whatever we do. So now we let the attention on the breath fade into the background and taking our attention to our thoughts. What are we thinking? And here again, can we be an observer of thoughts? So try and look at your thoughts as if they're clouds in the sky. Your mind is the sky, and the clouds of thoughts which arise, stay a while, and then go. Is your mind full of thoughts, or is it quite empty? Remember, there's no right or wrong way. Minds think. Are you thinking this is ridiculous? That's fine. And try not to get entangled by any thoughts. So just watch it arise and then go. Try not to suppress a thought, but try not to jump upon that thought train. If you do find yourself carried away by a thought, that's again completely normal. But just bring your attention back to trying to be an observer of those thoughts rather than being carried away by them. And finally, attention back to our bodies. Our bodies which tell us so much and so often we switch off from, especially if we're dizzy. So I just want you to scan through your body and see what you're noticing. Start from your head and move down, or your feet and move up, just dwelling for a few seconds on each body part. And seeing if you notice any tension or discomfort, holding, tingling, or nothing at all. Don't try and change that now, but just sort of note. Is your body maybe calling out for a little bit of love and attention, or rest, or mobility work, or exercise? And if you found any areas of tension, can you imagine breathing the breath into one of those areas? Just letting the breath soften around it. And now let's broaden the awareness to the weight of our bodies, the shape of our bodies, and the breath filling our entire bodies. And bring a little bit of movement into our fingers, our toes, our shoulders. And then when you're ready, if your eyes are open or closed, or if your eyes are closed, just open them. Okay, so feel free, we've been sat for quite some time, so feel free just maybe to get up if that works for you and have a little stretch. I'm going to do that. Never good to be sat in one position for a long time. Feel free to nip and go and get yourself a glass of water or anything that makes you comfortable. And part of mindfulness is attending to our well-being. Yeah, this isn't an endurance game. Sitting and listening to me is not an endurance game. Yeah, so at any time, if you want a toilet break, if you want to go and get a cup of tea, then feel free. Really listen to your body, as we did in that last few minutes. And if it's asking for a break, give it a break. And I know for many of you with visual sensitivity, maybe looking at the screen makes you feel funny. And so pacing is really important. One of the reasons we're recording this is that you can go back to it. So turn me off if you want. Feel free, turn my screen off. Lie down, just listen. Yeah? Do whatever is good for you. And we're all different, aren't we? So what we often do after a meditation is just to reflect on what we noticed during that time. And there's no right or wrong answers. So would anyone want to sort of share? And, you know, feel free to turn on your microphone if Life on Level people are happy, or to put in the chat box. Catherine, I see you put your hand up. Can you unmute? Yeah, go ahead, Catherine. Hi.
Hi, thank you very much. It was beautiful. My feet became lighter, my legs, my body, as I surrounded it with the breath, like you were saying, everything became lighter. And I actually, at the end of it, almost felt like I was floating on my recliner. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for sharing that. Was that a nice feeling, or?
It was lovely.
Okay, and what in turn did that do to your sort of thoughts and your sort of emotional status?
It relaxed me. I felt more peaceful, especially since the back of my neck and shoulders had been tight.
Yeah. So that's really good. And it's funny that just a few minutes of just having time focusing on the breath or the body, we so much run on automatic pilot. We're so busy, we don't have a time to look at the signals that the body are giving us, and at our own peril, really. And so you sort of noticed that. So that might be an area that you want to check in with a few times a day, just to make sure that you don't need to do some kind of relaxation. Floating on the air, that's good, that's lovely. And how that in turn influences your emotional state. Okay.
Oh, much better.
Yeah,
absolutely
yeah.
Much better, because I feel that mentally I'm in a better place to meet whoever or whatever is in front of me.
Yeah, and that's so important, isn't it? We've got all these physical symptoms, but they so also are linked with our emotional state. And again, I find it very useful before I give a presentation or job interviews or anything like that. And you can just do it you don't have to sit on the mat and do it for 20 minutes or an hour. And actually, one of a good thing is just to do some action mindfully. Yeah. So I'm always washing my hands because I'm a clinician. And so you could we have to wash our hands obviously between patients and between touching patients. So you could just do that mindfully. Can you feel the water on your hands? Is it hot? Is it cold? What's the sensation? What's the sound of the water? So you can sit and do a form of meditation, but you can also do things mindfully. Brushing your teeth, very good first thing in the morning. Watching the kettle boil. Claire, do you want to unmute?
Hi, yeah, I just wanted to share that I do a meditation class with a lady through my local MS Society group.
Mm-hmm.
And it's she can do anything from like what you've just done, the body scan, to taking us off into on a magical journey where we do all sorts of, go to different places up Glastonbury, that sort of thing. And or she can take us inside our body and view us from the inside, and all of these sorts of things are brilliant. And I can go into a meditation class and think, apart from the really vile days, I can think, I've got vertigo, I don't like this, I don't want to sit here, and by the end of it I don't want to leave the room. I'm just that relaxed, and it changes the vertigo.
It does, absolutely.
It relaxes it.
Yeah, so that's, thank you for sharing that Claire, and yes, there's a whole lot of different techniques, and what I do with my patients is I introduce them a whole raft of techniques, because what works for some may not work for another. So you don't necessarily need to do a whole mindfulness course. And yeah, visualizations, I'm terrible at visualizations, but for lots of people they really work. And I have what I call a safe space meditation, because actually so often if we take ourselves back to a time or a place where we were really happy and dizzy free, then that can kind of switch off those neural circuits attending to the dizziness, and we feel happy and relaxed, and that can be really useful. And people quite often do that with visualization. So there's a whole lot of stuff, and it's difficult initially. I'm still not very good at it, but it's a practice. And so if you don't like it initially, or you find it hard, you know, you wouldn't expect to run a marathon on day one. You wouldn't be able to expect to play Rachmaninoff's piano concerto. Did you write piano concerto? You know, it's a practice, and you can't fail. So thank you for that. Anyone else? Lots of really interesting. Who's this? Debbie Lou Carey. Hi, Debbie. Debbie's looking for her unmute.
Okay, I'm unmuted. The breathing, especially the deep breathing, actually makes me feel quite anxious.
Mm-hmm.
And that I find that I end up actually feeling more short of breath.
Yeah.
It's like you said, should I just stop trying to deep breathe and just focus on my feet or something?
So that's interesting, Debbie, and yes, that's why I specifically gave that instruction, that for some people, and for myself, because I also have a little bit of anxiety, the breath really becomes my anchor. But for other people, especially if you're prone to panic attacks, it can completely exacerbate your symptoms. So what I suggest is that there's lots of different grounding techniques. It can be the body scan, it can be the feet, it can be what we call exteroception. So taking your attention to what you can see, you can hear, you can smell, you can taste. So rather than focusing inwards, focusing outwards. So there's lots of good grounding techniques that I would start off initially with. However, the breath can be a very useful technique, okay, because there's lots of breathing techniques that can activate the parasympathetic or rest and digest nervous system, and what tends to happen in our persistent dizziness is that we're overactive in our sympathetic fight or flight reactions. And so when you've got some good grounding going on without the breath, then what you could do is you could turn very slowly towards it. And the thing to do is not to try and control it, not to breathe deep. That's not what I asked you to do initially, is just attend to it and see what you notice. Because lots of us with dizziness do have unhelpful breathing patterns, which in turn exacerbates the dizziness. Knowing that if it's too difficult, it's not an endurance race, so you can go back to grounding or the body or exteroceptions, and just see if over time, once you've got that grounding, which you know you can return to, if the breath might become a useful additional tool. And if it doesn't, that's fine. And the whole point, as I said, is what works for me may not work for you, and you're building up your own individualized toolkit.
Okay, just one quick question too. Why is mindfulness bad for PTSD?
So it's not necessarily bad for PTSD, but you need to have much greater clinical supervision. And because sometimes what it does is by focusing on the body, you might flash back if you had maybe an unfortunate sexual experience, a sexual exploitation experience. If you focus on your breath, then it might take you back to when you were very scared and hyperventilating. So actually mindfulness, trauma-sensitive mindfulness, which is a field on its own, can be very, very useful, but it just needs to be done with someone there probably initially, and some other techniques, which I can't really help you with today when there's so many of you. But absolutely, and there's lots of trauma-sensitive mindfulness work which is coming out. and working within your zone of tolerance, but it's just a bit more complicated, which is why I suggested you didn't do it today. Good. Well, I think we've got lots of sharing, and I guess we may need to move on, otherwise we'll be here all afternoon. But thank you so much for sharing that, and a whole raft of different experiences, both good and less good. And of course, mindfulness, and this is just one brief short meditation, there's a whole lot of different meditations. Mindfulness isn't a panacea, it's not a cure-all, and I never just give people mindfulness, and it may be mindfulness is about as far away from what you find useful as you could possibly think of, and that's fine, but I'm just introducing some of these techniques. And so here I put what some of you may or may not have noticed. And of course, yes, lovely, if you're feeling calm and relaxed, fantastic. Actually, mindfulness, it's a misnomer that mindfulness is about relaxing. It's not, actually. It's about noticing and becoming aware. Now, quite often, as one of us experience a day, through that noticing and stopping and focusing on the breath or the body, we do feel relaxed, but that's not the aim of mindfulness, actually. If you're noticing tension or stiffness, if you're noticing poor breathing, if you're noticing repetitive or negative thoughts, okay, that's your body and mind calling out to you. And rather than blocking off from that, it's saying, please give me a bit of time and attention. And so often we block off from what our bodies are telling us, from what our minds are telling us. Yeah? And that's not good. We run on automatic pilot. Automatic pilot can be good, but not if your body is like telling you something through its breath, through its tension, and not if you're getting not aware of what your mind is thinking, because we can get into negative spirals of thought without really being aware of that. So awareness may be unpleasant, but it also gives us power. So there's lots of different definitions, but I like present moment. So in the present moment, non-judgmental, whatever we notice is fine. There's no right or wrong. Awareness of what's happening in our breath, body, mind, and thoughts. Yeah. Acceptance of what is. Now, acceptance is a difficult word in this field because we sometimes think of acceptance as sort of passive, you know, lying down and just accepting everything. And it's not that at all. Acceptance is power, actually. Active allowing of what is, rather than fighting everything that's happening. And we have this little saying, what we resist persists. And interestingly, the more you kind of fight against the dizziness, the more likely it is to persist. And I talked about meditations, but I also talked everyday life. You can walk to the car mindfully. You can go on a mindful walk. You can watch the kettle boil and do that in a mindful way. So, yeah, I guess we've sort of been through this, but many patients, many people with dizziness then notice things like they're holding their bodies tightly. They're not moving very much because moving enhances their dizziness. Yeah, they're holding their bodies tightly because they know if they move their head, it's going to make them worse. What this does is it can lead to secondary problems like neck pain, like headaches. Most of you will know that actually a common technique that we use for sort of stable balance problems is vestibular rehabilitation, and that actually needs you to move. So we've already identified some understandable yet unhelpful behaviors. We all know about the breath, holding the breath, anxious breathing. In our thoughts, are we having these negative, understandable thoughts which are unhelpful? Something is seriously wrong, it's been missed, I've got a brain tumor, I will never get better. Now, these are really, really common, understandable thoughts. And they're bad enough if they're if we are aware of them, but we know that our minds really affect our recovery, don't we? But if you're not aware of them, then they're like ruminating in your head, churning away, and the brain thinks, my gosh, something is really wrong. Maybe they have missed a brain tumor. So the brain increases its sensitivity to dizziness, increases its vigilance and its sensitivity. And so you're going to notice it more, which makes the brain think, my goodness, something has been missed. And so we like go up and up and up the spiral. And all this puts the brain into probably what you've heard of, the sympathetic nervous system, the fight or flight. Something is wrong. The amygdala in the brain fires. There is a threat to our well-being. And that cycle I've just alluded to, ironically, tends to make the dizziness worse. So if we're aware of these things through mindfulness, through awareness, we can identify any negative or unhelpful ways of being, however understandable they are, and they are completely understandable. And if I didn't know, I would be doing exactly the same thing and maybe change. So once we are aware, we can choose how to respond. Now that may not be easy, but we then have choice. Acceptance and self-compassion then. So yeah, we can choose to when we get our symptoms, which again is understandable, but again makes the brain very, very worried. Or we can choose over time to teach ourselves to get to a point, oh, hi, dizziness, you're here. I'm not going to react to you. Now, I'm not suggesting so much to do that for an acute attack, because in an acute attack, you know, you need to do a number of things to keep yourself safe, go to bed, you know, take your Buccal, whatever you do. But actually, if we think, okay, it's another attack, I've got two choices. I can get really upset and really hypervigilant, or I can, okay, what I need to do is X, Y, Z. And that will maybe turn down that intensity of the dizziness, because instead of having all this kind of emotional stuff, which enhances the primary physical responses, we have the primary physical responses. And this is the concept of primary and secondary suffering, which I'm going to come to a bit later. Non-reactance is very, 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 very difficult, but if you can do it, that's brilliant. Can we learn in this bottom right picture to surf the wave of the dizziness rather than to swim against the tide? And this active allowing, a willingness to continue. I've already covered this, even if symptoms persist. So many people say, I can't get on with life unless I get rid of my dizziness. Yeah, I completely understand that. But sometimes, like in chronic pain, like in a lot of other chronic health conditions, we're not going to be able to do that for you. And there was a lovely couple of slides on acceptance and that kind of grieving cycle, which Dr. Simpson went through. And it is a bit of a grief. Yeah. Now, hopefully we can improve them, and definitely we can help support you to live well according to your values with whatever symptoms remain, or sometimes they go. And care, self-care. Are you looking after yourself? So many of my patients, they feel bad about their symptoms. They don't know why. They feel they're a failure. They feel that they've let their family or work colleagues down. And that they wouldn't do that if a family member had dizziness, which is really interesting. You're not very well. So how would you treat a loved one who wasn't very well? Show yourself some self-compassion. You can't pour from an empty cup. Look after yourself first. Yeah? And that's not selfish. We could have a whole session on that. So this is what I'm trying to facilitate. This dizziness dog moving from where it's in control of your life, helpless, hopeless, scared, a whole lot of emotional responses, to building a different relationship with that dizziness, even if in the context of continuing symptoms. And so this does not mean necessarily, although it does in some people with persistent dizziness, extinction of symptoms. It means living well with. It may mean that you do get rid of the symptoms, and if you've got more straightforward dizziness without this persistent dizziness, it can be very useful as an adjunct to conventional vestibular rehabilitation, which we do help to get rid of symptoms. So you don't befriend it, but you have a different relationship with it. I'm not really suggesting that picture on the right, but see what you can change your relationship towards. What we resist persists. So does anyone, I think a couple of you already have practices. Does anyone, so someone, sorry, I've forgotten your name. I've got a brain like a sieve. But anyone else use mindfulness? Do you find it useful or do you not find it useful? Anyone want to share, or put your hand up and then anyone putting their hand up?
Hello, Debbie.
Yes, sorry, I've got so many people here. I can't. Who's that? Nice to see.
It's Richard.
Yeah, carry on.
Yeah, all I was going to say is that I'm on a lot of the migraine Zoom groups, and there's just a massive difference between somebody having anxiety and depression, which is like 1 in 4 people in the UK, than somebody having generalized anxiety disorder.
Absolutely.
And this is where the problem lies, because the people who have all the mental health issues beforehand, it's a lot worse for them, like myself.
Yeah, yeah.
Like I've got 7 different mental health diagnoses.
My gosh.
So
yeah, so we do tend to find if you've got pre-existing anxiety or depression, it's more difficult. But anxiety and depression, if you've never had it, can sort of surface. So do you use mindfulness?
I do meditation through YouTube videos, but it's just.
Are they useful?
If they are useful, it's just really difficult explaining to people, because they go, I've got anxiety and depression, whereas unless you've got generalized anxiety disorder and you've had it for like 20 years, that's a totally different thing altogether.
Yeah. I mean, you're right, unfortunately. I think this is getting better over the years, is that especially if you have had past mental health problems, quite often medical practitioners will say, well, it's just an extension of that. And it may be, but it may well not be. So yeah, it's difficult to get that message across. Claire Morgan, I know, feel free not to respond, but I know Claire, I met her a few weeks ago. Claire, any aspects of mindfulness that you found particularly useful? Or can you unmute, Claire?
Sorry, yes. Yes, certainly. When the dizziness hit, it's quite a long time ago now, about 9 years ago, but I was getting quite severe panic attacks. And I think that it was only when I really recognized that the fear aspects and the grieving aspects of the condition was exacerbating the dizziness. I really understood I had to use whatever conscious bits of the mind that I had access to work at the anxiety. And so mindfulness was really life-changing for me, because it helped to root me in my body in a different kind of way. So I think with the dizziness, I lost a sense of where my body was in space. And I think focusing on things like the feet, or just stroking my arms, or as I was saying to Debbie, just smiling, even if I didn't feel like it when I was doing my vestibular exercises. Finding a way to really connect with my body was my first step in being able to soothe the system. And so mindfulness over the years has, as I say, been truly life-changing. So now I have occasional setbacks with the old dizziness, and there's a bit of underlying dizziness around. But the difference is that it's not triggering that primal fear. I think you mentioned that sense of impending doom in your presentation, and I thought, oh yes, that is exactly what I used to feel after I'd been trying to look at a computer screen or something. I'd get a sense of impending doom. I think it's cortisol that does that to you. And so the mindfulness was just me recognizing, oh, there's the impending doom again, is it? And rather than, oh my goodness, I've done something really stupid. Now it's going to be weeks and weeks before I get back to the state I was before I looked at that computer screen too long, or whatever it was. So I think it enabled me to distance myself a little bit from the chaotic sort of situation I felt I was in, and gradually over time to gain a greater respect for what my body was actually calling out for. and what it needed. Yeah.
Thank you, Claire. Yes, yes. So very, very useful for you to share that, and everyone sort of has different experiences of it. And it's important to say that I'd never just give mindfulness alone, yeah, because there's so much else that we need to do as well, and part of that is vestibular rehabilitation, which I see that some of you have been talking about on the chat. Right, another quick stretch.
Before we move on, and we've got some hands up, that's all.
Oh, have you? Sorry.
Yeah, I've got at least 4.
Oh, I must
Yes.
No,
it's fine, don't worry, that's what I'm here for.
Do you want to coordinate that then?
Yeah, I'm just going to go down my list of who I think.
Yes, Catherine, yes.
Yeah, Catherine was the first
Judith
one.
and Deborah,
Go for it, Catherine, if you unmute yourself, and then you can put.
Yes, thank you. I wanted to say that the incorporation of mindfulness, as I do it, I try and stay in the present moment. And if I'm washing a cup in the sink, I focus on the water, I focus on the sponge, the smell of, you know, whatever lovely detergent I'm using. You know, I may hear birds out the window. And what it does is it slows me down.
Yeah.
I observe and I have gratitude. And I had, I had an ocular migraine. I had something that I saw. I have vestibular migraine. And I went to the neuro-otologist yesterday. I see him twice a year, and I didn't know what it was. And he told me what it was. And I like what you said about not panicking because something happens. In the beginning, my anxiety was so high because all of this was so new. And if it wasn't for Zoom, I would not even be able to be with you. And I have no support around here like a group like this in New Jersey.
I'm sorry.
So it gives me a lot of gratitude, you know, to observe, to not react, to be in the moment, and to know that I'm okay.
Oh, thank you, Catherine. Yeah, thank you. And gratitude is difficult because can we have gratitude when we're feeling very, very ill? But I hope that we can. And so quite often I suggest gratitude to people, and sort of writing down what I'm trying to do at the moment is write down, I've not been very well myself a little bit of time, and I'm trying to make myself write down 3 things that I'm grateful for. And it may just be the sun in the sky, it may be the birds singing, however little can really be useful, although it is very difficult. And there's some days, and especially if you're acutely dizzy, you can't, and that's okay. But yeah, great, and I'm glad we're here for you. Deborah.
I think for me, if it's a particularly bad attack, and I try very, very hard not to lie down, because I know that's not really particularly good, but just to be safe, then I think what I'll do is, even lying down, to just try and reassure myself. I will try and do some mindfulness, and then just to concentrate on the breath, and then the way it makes me calmer.
Yeah.
But when I feel better, I still do it now, actually, or just because I find it helps with just everyday things, even like at the moment I'm really good. If somebody rings me with some bad news or something, I'll just take a minute if I can and just sit and just practice on the breathing.
So thank you, Deborah, and you've made a really important point. Mindfulness is a way of life, and it's not just when you're acutely unwell, it's a practice. So when we first started off, actually, so I'm just standing because, and do feel free to, I've got a bit of a lower back problem, so I am still here. Feel free at any point to go, and you might want to grab a quick break. That's fine. I don't think I'll have a sort of formal break, but I just really look after yourselves. If you haven't had a break, then please go and have a bit of break now, a toilet stop, a cup of tea, because it's all recorded. You know your bodies. Yes. It's a practice, and so it's difficult to cultivate when you are very dizzy. So we need to cultivate when we're not dizzy, so that it will be helpful when we are dizzy, but it's also helpful during everyday life. And so building a regular practice is really, really important, because it is a technique. And if we don't do it for 6 months and then suddenly we have a dizzy attack, we've kind of forgotten how we kind of do it. And yes, about building a self-soothing kit as well. So what helps you when you have a dizzy attack? yeah, and making a little box of things or writing it down. So some people it's lying down, sometimes people it's sitting up. You know, is it a cup of tea? Is it a hug? Is it stay away from me? And it's about building that toolkit of mindfulness techniques, but also self-soothing techniques, which only you can explore and build. Judith. Are you there, Judith?
Yes, I am. I am here. Thank you. Can you hear me?
I can, Judith.
Yes. Thank you for your presentation. I was listening as I was trying to cook some lunch because I got all my timings wrong.
Oh.
I got a guest for lunch. But what I wanted to say is that I have been particularly anxious recently, having received a new diagnosis. So on top of my BPPV, I've now got early onset Meniere's and triple PD. And when I went to my appointment, Professor Ray said I oozed anxiousness in the room, and it's been rather a shock to me. So I've started to utilise mindfulness.
Good.
I'm at my very early stages of it, but I am finding it helpful, and I've also been doing some guided meditations online via Joe Bowlby, who is also very good. I can do visualization as I've done it in the past, but I wanted to say thank you to the group, thank you to Kevin, and thank you to you as a guest speaker, because without this support, the information that we have, my dizzy journey would be far more traumatic.
Absolutely. And it is about connecting with people, but connecting in a positive way, because sometimes groups can get really quite negative. Oh, I've got X, Y, and Z, and it's awful, and my symptoms are more awful than you. And this group doesn't do this. It's all about keeping positive. And it's another kind of basic technique that we use is what we dwell on, we become. And do you want to, so if we dwell all the time on negative and dizziness, then it's going to kind of carry on happening. Do you tend the garden of your mind or the weeds of your mind? Yeah. It's very difficult. So I'm not asking you, but I'm just saying that that positive outlook and having a group which does have a very positive, supportive outlook, because that hidden disability and feeling of isolation can be so impactful in a negative way. I am seeing the time, sorry, because I've got still quite a lot to say. Was there anyone else who wanted to share, Kelly?
Debbie, I think, Simon, do you want to share anything? Because I've seen your hand go up, down, up, down. I wasn't sure. And I know you put a question in the chat, so I thought I'd just
question in the chat.
I'm okay, Kelly. If you can just do the question in the chat later, that'd be cool.
Yeah, I've made a note of it. So
you made good, jolly good.
Oh, alrighty. No, I think that's it then.
Okay. So this is kind of my model, which may not be a lot to you, but I don't know if there are any clinicians today. I always just put my little model up. You know, people have been passed, you sometimes will have been passed from pillar to post, you know, get a grip, it's all in your head, it's generalized anxiety, as another person said. And we all know that whilst anxiety can exacerbate and actually can be the cause of some people's dizziness, you guys probably that's not the case, and you may feel a whole host of emotions secondary to that. And so I always took my first appointment is really getting to know you and really understanding what has happened to you and how that's impacted your life. We then talk a lot about 3PD as these patients I normally see, or vestibular migraine or Meniere's, to put that in context and to say that these are kind of normal but unhelpful responses. And so there's nothing wrong with you. You're not going mad. You're not making it up. And there's written patient information. Medication's helpful in some cases. And then I go through all these meditation techniques on the left-hand side, which I'll go through a little bit more detail. Finishing up then And this is always tailored to the individual needs. It may be that I just jump in right here with our vestibular rehabilitation exercises. And that's what most people, you know, that's the only thing that they need. And these are very, very useful and efficacious, and can work really sort of relatively quickly, as long as you're happy to evoke the dizziness. And what we need to do for this remarkable phenomenon of neuroplasticity is, ironically, expose the brain to the dizzy signals. And so probably most of you will have tried not to evoke the dizzy signals because it's counterintuitive, isn't it? And so if we explain that and we can evoke the dizzy signals, then compensation, this recalibration of the system, will hopefully occur. Sometimes, obviously, evoking the symptoms evokes massive anxiety or fear or worry, and then we sort of start as many of these as we need. And so we're trying to sort of say, look, brain, thanks for caring about me, but dizziness now, although an acute attack is a threat, we need the brain to think, okay, what's happening here when you have an acute attack initially, because you don't want to jump in the car as if nothing else has been happening. But what happens is the brain continues to think that this dizziness is a threat, and you get into lots of these behavioral and emotional, not very helpful sets of being. And then, of course, I'm not a clinical psychologist, so I've been trained in some basic CBT therapy, a trained mindfulness teacher and a clinical scientist in vestibular imbalance. But, you know, for me and for audiologists, I say, you know, we need to draw the line. Okay, you need some additional psychological help, and so I refer on. So let's going through some of these techniques. So we've kind of talked about these already. We've done a few of them. Yeah, what works well for you to help ground you? And I give a picture of a tree, another picture may be a mountain. Whatever's happening in the weather pattern around the tree, however much your branches are swaying, as long as you don't have problems with the sensation in your feet, yeah, your roots, your feet can remain stable and strong. So whatever happens in that weather pattern around that mature oak over the years, or the mountain, it remains steadfast and strong. So we've taught that you can ground with the feet, the seat, the breath. Body scans are useful. We've talked about that safe space medication, and everyone is different. I like the breath. Some people hate the breath. The body scan, yeah? How is your holding your body? If you like that all the time, I exaggerate, your brain's going to think, blimmin' heck, there's something wrong, yeah? That's what we used to do. You know, when there was a line behind me, we'd go like that, and then we'd activate that sympathetic fight or flight response, and all the adrenaline and long-term cortisol. So are you holding yourself tightly? And you can do that by the body scan to sort of detect. And then there's a whole variety of different sort of relaxation-y type things. And you need to be able to relax and move your head for the sort of vestibular rehabilitation exercise component at the end. The breath. Not for everyone, but first, can we observe it? Have we got unhelpful breath patterns, which might be exacerbating the dizziness, just as holding the body tightly is? Yeah, and can we then, if we're identifying that, teach ourselves some relaxing, calming, soothing breathing techniques? And there's a whole lot of those. Stimulating the parasympathetic rest or digest system. And it can be very grounding. I like to think about the breath coming up through my whole body and then sinking back down and going down to the earth, up and down. We can think about breathing in something that we like, that we want to feel, and breathing out something that we don't want to feel. Although mindfulness is not about getting rid, if you're in acute dizziness, if you're in bad pain, yeah, we might need another technique. So we can imagine breathing in light and then just breathing out and softening around that pain or that dizziness. That's something that I tend to do. I suffer from some pain issues, and I like to sort of breathe in warm light, and that can help me, and then breathe out the less good symptoms when things are bad for me. So this is interesting. As long as you don't have any arthritis, you're not going to cause yourself pain. I want you to, when I say clench your fist as hard as you can. So really, 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 really clench, 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 clench. What's happened to your breath? And then release. So what happened to your breath and body then? Anyone? Yeah, Debbie Lou?
I stopped breathing. And my shoulders went up. Yeah.
Nicola held her breath. Debbie Lou stopped breathing. Her shoulders went up. Yeah. And so this is what happens. And that's a big exaggeration of what happens if we hold our bodies tensely because we're worried or fearful about the dizziness. Our breathing goes funny. And what you can try is sort of clenching again and then trying to actively breathe in. Now, it doesn't take away all the tension, but clenching and trying to breathe in and making sure you're breathing, everything kind of relaxes a little bit more than that tensed state. So there is this link between the breath and the body. We need to be aware of that. So this is always, all our awareness is what I teach people first. How aware of your thoughts and your emotions are you? And we have this concept in breath where it's called primary and secondary suffering. And I alluded to it a while back. So our primary suffering is all that sort of basic unpleasant horribleness from our dizziness, our lightheadedness, our anxiety, our vomiting. Now, there may be at this precise point in time when you're having an attack, nothing much we can do about that. And it's horrid, and no one's saying it's not horrid. But let's put that at about that level. Okay. And then we have an understandable emotional response to it and a resistance to those feelings. Again, understandable. Yeah. And we call that secondary suffering. Why is this happening to me? This will never end. I feel exhausted, anger. Why is this happening to me? Worry. I'm not going to be able to provide for the family. And this adds to our primary suffering. And so our end symptoms are all the way up here. And whilst we might not be able to stop that dizzy attack, we do, although it's difficult, should be able to have some control over that secondary suffering. And so if we're aware of that and we have tactics to help, we can take our symptoms down to here. And in pain, definitely, they've shown that some symptoms have even deteriorated, diminished further. Mindfulness for thought then, so we've just been talking about thoughts, and these can exacerbate our symptoms. You know, why me? I'm never going to get better. Have they missed something? Very, very common thoughts. And your brain goes, oh gosh, well maybe they have, so I'm going to be more hypervigilant and more hypersensitive. Not all thoughts, however amazing and wonderful your brain is, not all your thoughts will be facts or be true. Not all thoughts are facts. So be aware of that. Try not to get tangled up in them. And we like to think maybe of our minds as sky. And as I said, clouds here can be stormy, can be a bright day. Yeah, but whatever happens, unless you're in Manchester, although it is today, that those clouds will tend to clear. And life is in flow. We all have days like this, and we all have days like that. But life is in flow, and you will probably find that not all days are as bad or as good as each other. So can we let them come and go like these clouds in the sky and not get tangled up in them? Of course, if we become aware of negative repetitive thoughts, then they needed to be attended to, just as tension in the body or poor breathing needs to be attended to. Yeah, and so then you need to do that with your therapist or your vestibular rehabilitation specialist. And what we need to do is kind of try and lean into them rather than resist them. They do need to be addressed. Another way of dealing with our thoughts can be the cognitive behavioral therapy approach, and can be more of a direct challenging. And this is also very good. And I try to sort of pick and choose what I feel is the most beneficial for patients if they need some cognitive work. And this tells us about the relationship, as I'm sure you're all aware, between thoughts, feelings, behaviors, and bodily reactions. So for example, your friends asked you out for a social evening, and you think, what if I get a dizzy attack? Okay, and then your thoughts may be, gosh, well, that would be embarrassing, I might not be able to cope, which then would start to make you quite anxious. So then you start to getting those physical sensations of anxiousness, which then if you already have dizziness will make it worse. And you think, oh, I just can't. And so you phone and cancel. Then all that dizziness tends to subside. But you've not shown yourself that actually you might have been able to cope with it. And so what we then try and do is we challenge those negative but understandable thoughts and try and rationalize them a little bit better, try and work out why you are having them, and to gradually expose you to those things which you're a little bit worried about in a hierarchical way.
Nearly finished.
To show that you can cope. But often we have anxiety and we overestimate the danger. What is the worst that could happen? Or underestimate our coping and resources. And desired sensations. So someone was talking about that safe space. And this is a concept from that book that someone was talking about, Joey Remini's Rock Steady. So we've kind of thought about ways that we can ground and take our attention away from the dizziness if that's getting too much. But actually, neurons that far together wire together. If we always are sort of grounding and taking our attention away from the dizziness, then, you know, that's sort of not living well with it. And so what we can do is imagine how we want to feel and start firing up those neural pathways. And you can do that by imagining how you felt in a safe space or a lovely time in your life. You can do it by trying to visualize what stability or groundedness or whatever you want to feel feels like in your body. You can imagine feeling it, or you can see if you can feel it in your body, and then gradually get that to rise up in your body and to expand. It's quite a difficult technique, but we're now focusing on how we want to feel, not what we want to get rid of. And so here's another bit of art from a patient, how she wants to feel. So you can do it with a picture, you can do it with words, you can do it with sounds. And here how she's feeling at the moment. This is a lighthouse. Her safe space is floating in the water by that lighthouse, which is interesting because I would think swimming in water, floating in the water for a dizzy patient wouldn't be good, but it's absolutely good for her. So she brings that to mind to help her feel her desired sensations. You can also do it with words. So if you can't feel it in your body, you can repeat the words. Again, self-soothing. This is how she feels at the moment. This is how she wants to feel. She's a great artist, is this lady. Pacing. How many of you use pacing? And so this is all about, you know, the body is amazing, but you may be doing too much, which is exacerbating your symptoms. And this works very well in chronic fatigue. They're also using it for long COVID. And it's quite good just to spend a little bit of time keeping one of these relevant to you. So it may be tinnitus, it may be dizziness, it may be anxiety, for a couple of representative days. We never want to focus too much on our symptoms, and just see if there are any patterns of things that exacerbate your symptoms. And if there are, you can work out the minimum time that exacerbates your symptoms and start off by doing 80% of that and then build. Or it may be that nothing particularly exacerbates your symptoms, but you just like on the go all day, and you get to the end of the day, especially if you're working, you feel terrible. So are you having frequent breaks? And what we're trying to do here is avoid that kind of boom and bust and overwhelming the body, where sometimes we can feel a little bit better, do lots and lots, and then the next day have a crash. Or sometimes we're just every evening terribly, terribly tired and crash. So this is the concept of pacing. And then finally onto this active allowing. So we've like grounded ourselves. We've imagined feeling as we want to feel, but it may be that we still got quite a lot of dizziness. So then let's try and build a better relationship with our dizziness, a kind of, oh, okay, I'm not going to respond to you kind of reaction. And that in turn will help decrease your sort of secondary suffering. So I said about that talk by Dr. Lynette Simpsons at the bottom. And this is a quote from my patient. And it's very difficult to do, but if you can, this is absolutely fundamental in you actually quite often really getting rid of those symptoms, or at least living well with. And you can understand that if symptoms are a little bit better and you're doing stuff that you like, you're focusing stuff that you like rather on the sustainers rather than your drainers, yeah, you can spiral upwards. And then your brain doesn't become so worried about dizziness, no more hypersensitivity, no more hypervigilance. And you're kind of living like, I have a bit of a lower back problem. We overdo things a bit, my back hurts, I know what to do. So this is not a quick process. And there's lots of stuff on this. And you tend to, there's various different stages. But this is all in the sort of Mindfulness for Health program. For your sort of, it's an advanced technique and comes like quite far through the course. But what we do now is actively turn towards our symptoms with curiosity, kindness, and compassion, knowing that if it's too much, we can come back to our anchor, our grounding. And over time, okay, dizziness, you're here again. So those of you with acute attacks, it's happened again. Okay, it's not great, but I now know what to do. And you turn off all that secondary suffering, which hopefully will help that acute dizzy attack. So sometimes people find that it's the fear of an attack rather than actual attack, which gives them more worry. Can we accept and breathe into the symptoms or the fear of symptoms returning? And it's very important to do it very slowly with whatever anchor. Once you've understood and you've got your own sort of toolkit, you may not be dizzy all the time. Sometimes, obviously, by focusing in on the symptoms, just as the lady said, when she focused in on her breath, it made her worse. So that's fine. It might be too early to do this. But again, you can turn towards it for a few breaths and then come back to your anchor. And self-compassion. Yeah, we've talked about this. You can build a little self-compassion toolkit. You need to take care of yourself. It's not your fault that you're having these symptoms. They're horrible. Most people don't understand. So take care of yourself. And I like getting people to build a self-compassion toolkit, whether that might be a nice bubble bath, it might be a DVD, it might be a trip to a football match, whoever you are. We want to increase sustainers, those things that we enjoy doing and give us happiness and joy, and decrease the drainers. And so often with dizziness, especially if we're working, we feel we need to keep up our job, and all we do is drainers, work, look after the kids, etc., etc., and we spiral down. Are you treating yourself as you would a friend? And then once we've got all those techniques, it may be that you need some habituation exercises, so desensitization exercises. And initially we start sort of moving you. So mindful movement, which is kind of qigong, slow controlled with the breath. That might make you feel dizzy because vestibular rehabilitation does, but we've got our anchors and we need to move you to get that final stage of the brain's recalibration. To then maybe hopefully get rid of the dizziness if there's any left. All depends on your different conditions. Meniere's and vestibular migraine, if they're active, this probably isn't going to work until they're inactive. So I have all these different resources here. And then finally, what I call vestibular rehabilitation, which is exposing the brain to the symptoms. Now we've turned off any anxiety. If we do this too early, yeah, we expose ourselves to the symptoms, then it's just going to trigger the anxiety response and going to really prevent or minimize conventional compensation from occurring. And that can be visual desensitization, it can be motion desensitization. Sometimes we use the wrong postural control strategies. So this is again what a physiotherapist or an audiologist who's skilled in vestibular rehabilitation. And then there may be a whole lot of things that we stop doing because we fear getting dizzy or because we are dizzy. And so we gradually incorporate that into the plan, which is very tailored to your individual needs. And we do it very slowly with our breath and with our anchors. So how I see mindfulness helping as part of a tailored, individualized program, and never just on your own, and you may not need it at all, is that mindfulness is all about increasing your awareness to your body, your breathing, and your unhelpful thoughts. And if you find that any of those things, you're doing unhelpful things, you're breathing poorly, then we can foster new, more helpful ways of being. We're changing our relationship with the dizziness. Yeah, what we dwell on, we become. We're not frightened about it in the same way, and drawing closer and non-reactance to the symptoms. And so the brain thinks, okay, I don't need to be worried about these symptoms anymore. They're not a threat. I'm not going to die. And it turns off that anxiety, that stress response. And then if you still got symptoms, then the brain can recalibrate or desensitize. Here's just a few things that some of my dizzy patients found useful. So the awareness meditations, thoughts, so the primary and secondary suffering, being kind to self, getting together in the group, as you've all said. A few quotes here. Helped me take control rather than to sit passively. Find the positive in the negative. Take control of the panic attacks. So this patient at the bottom wasn't symptom free, but I can cope my condition as I now understand, and I have strategies in place that will help me maintain where I am and hopefully help me reduce over time. And this is one of my first patients who has done phenomenally well. She's still dizzy, actually. She goes to work full time, she plays golf, she wins golf. This is one of my first patients who was incapacitated with anxiety and chronic dizziness and couldn't even go out of the house. Just ending then with one patient who continues to have dizziness. That's how she came to me. She felt trapped. The dizziness was eating her up inside. It was coming to Christmas. No one understood. She couldn't do anything that she loved. Then we began to do some work together and she felt not alone anymore. She began some strategies. So making that connection, whether it's with people in this group or with, your clinician. That journey was not smooth. It was up and down. Life is up and down. Life is in flow. But eventually she got to a place, even though she was dizzy, what she'd done is she'd had to stop reading and going to her book club. She loved her garden. Both of those were sustainers. And we were able to get her back to both of those. So this is a photo of her in her garden reading with her aces and roses and tulips, apparently. So may or may not be useful. It's not a panacea. It needs to be done in a tailored management plan. Useful for everyone, I would argue, in everyday life. We're trying to live well with the symptoms rather than getting rid. So maybe have a reflect and give it a go. And I've sent some resources to you so that you can kind of click on them. So Kevin, if you email that, you can click on some of the links. So I teach the Mindfulness for Health program. That can be done in person and online and just by the book. I also, as well as working for the NHS, I do some private work. So I can lead you through that course virtually, or I can lead a group of you, if a group was interested, through it virtually. Or it may be that you can get it free from somewhere. There are some bursaries if you don't have a lot of money. But there's lots of other mindfulness courses which are just as good. I point you in the direction, if you have got a practice, of this mindfulness community of practice. And this is a group which is run by Breathworks to help people connect through mindfulness, whatever they use it for. And there are led meditations and groups. So I have a dizziness and tinnitus group. It's meant to be for people with established practices rather than, we don't teach you how to meditate. but it's got weekly sessions, it's got led meditations, it's got a whole lot of information, and general support is another support portal for people with shared experiences. And then what you might want to do when you drink your next coffee or tea or glass of wine is to do it mindfully. So, anything else? Someone said about when they meditate, they feel spinny. Could you that kind of elaborate on that? Whoever said that, if they wish to, no need to if you don't want to.
That was sorry.
Yeah, go ahead, Debbie.
Oh, that was me. When I do close my eyes, it starts, after a while, it just sort of starts to spin and literally pulls me out of the chair.
Okay.
It can do.
So that's not abnormal, because we're very reliant on our vision. And if that's you, then don't close your eyes. Find a posture that works for you. Eyes open, it may be sitting, standing, lying down, holding on to something. You don't have to sit cross-legged with your eyes closed on a mat.
Right.
I think balanced body is living well with unpredictability. So the unpredictability, and this is one of the worst things, if you have episodic dizziness, and that's horrible because you don't know when it's coming. And what I would suggest is don't alter your life because of it, but tell people that you might need to cancel last minute. If I'd gone down with COVID today, you wouldn't like chastise me for saying, I'm sorry, I can't come, would you? And, you know, we tend to, well, I don't want to let people down, but actually they would much prefer you meet with them rather and sort of say, I'm so sorry, I'm dizzy today, as long as you've told them about your dizziness, rather than stop everything that you love and you spiral deeper into depression, anxiety, and worsening of symptoms. So the unpredictability is bad. We know that life is in flow. You're going to have good days and bad days, as everyone has. And again, if we can just kind of be a bit more accepting of that rather than battle against it. I don't think rock steady. So someone mentioned rock steady. So this is a wonderful woman who I've actually done a little bit with. Her rock steady book, she asked me and a number of other practitioners to read through it. And this gives, well, we very much sing from the same hymn sheet. I haven't written a book. And she also runs courses, online courses, using very much this kind of listen to your body. It's not all about getting rid. Desired sensations, her concept, living well with, using a sort of meditation, yoga, value-driven approach. And it's all written down in a book, which is very good, and some general information about dizziness and tinnitus, etc., etc. So it's fantastic. There is also quite an expensive course, and I'm not very sure that if I was dizzy, that I could have the discipline and understanding to do, depending on the severity of my dizziness, to do it on my own. And I would probably need the course, which in turn is very expensive. She gives you a few free resources, but I think the whole concept is lovely. It's fantastic. And actually it's very much kind of what I do. And there's some excellent resources. Again, if you go onto her website, there's lots of good podcasts and some really, really useful resources as well. And if, you know, your NHS doesn't provide this kind of service and you have the money, and I hate to say that because, I don't want people with money to get treatment. And as I say, I mean, I give it mostly for free. Then absolutely. I've obviously not done her entire program. But hopefully you might be able to find somebody who can. Obviously Lynette Simpson does something very similar. I can do it privately. If you're in Manchester, you'll probably be able to get referred to me. But yeah, excellent stuff.
Hi, Debbie. I've got a couple of questions that I'll pick up on the chat, if that's all right.
Of course.
One is from Simon. Simon's asked, can you explain the difference between mindfulness, NLP and CBT, and how these can complement and benefit if indeed they can?
So I'm not so clear about Neurolingual Processing, NLP. Mindfulness and CBT definitely kind of interact. cognitive behavioral therapy is, so both need awareness, yeah? Cognitive behavioral therapy is this interplay between thoughts, feelings, behaviors, and bodily reactions. So I gave an example of a cycle there about me not wanting to go out because I was dizzy. And of course, you know, get asked to do something, then you think about it, then you worry about it, then it's manifest in your body, and because you're worried that something will happen, and then your behavior is to not do that activity. And so CBT is all about being aware of that and then challenging your negative automatic thoughts. Okay, so what's the evidence that if you go out, you will be sick or you won't be able to cope? So it's a very kind of analytical. So have you got any evidence? Well, I don't suppose I really have. Well, okay, what's holding you back then? And could we give it a go? Or could we do a sort of easier version of what you're fearful of? Yeah. So it's kind of challenging these thoughts and behaviors in a kind of cognitive way, looking at the link between, as the words say, your cognitions, your thoughts, and your behaviors. So that works very, very well for some. For some, it doesn't. And the mindfulness way, again, is to start with the mindfulness, the awareness, which actually you need then for CBT. And then we're approaching these thoughts and things in a different way, yeah? We're trying not to get involved with them. We're letting them pass. If we are identifying lots that come up, then we do some different work by kind of leaning into them and allowing them to be rather than resist and get rid. So they are very similar, but the way of dealing with thoughts is sort of quite different. But both approaches can work. And for me, I think I'm more mindful. For lots of other people, because I did have CBT for my depression, that didn't really work. For some people, it's life-changing. Neurolingual processing, I'm afraid I'm not really that au fait with, so I couldn't comment on that.
Brilliant. Thank you, Debbie. I've just got one more question that I've picked up on the chat, and then I think your time has been very well spent. So thank you. The last question I've got is from Richard, and he's put that he's had a VNG test a few months ago, and it came back with a lot of nystagmus. He'd like to know, what is this and how do you treat it?
Oh, that's a big question. So, right. So a video nystagmography or VNG test, one of the ways that we look at the balance system and to see how it's working is a bit peculiar because we look at the eyes. And that's because our balance organs are located deep within the skull, so we can't record from them directly, but then they are linked to the eyes. So if you look at my eyes, when I'm looking at my finger and I'm moving my head, you'll see that my eyes are moving equally and oppositely to my finger. And that's called the vestibular ocular reflex. Vestibular balance system, ocular, eyes, reflex, it happens without me doing anything. And so what we find is there is a whole lot of normal eye movements with a healthy balance system and a whole lot of abnormal eye movements in an unhealthy balance system. And there's loads and loads of different types. And one of them is nystagmus. Now, nystagmus can be normal and cannot be normal. But essentially, we have our two balance organs working at the same level when we're at rest. And when we move our heads to the right, this one goes up and this one goes down, and it fires in the nerve. And our eyes move equally and oppositely. And at rest, they're like that, and your eyes are still. And we need those to be at rest at the same level. If this one drops, we've got an asymmetry there, and that manifests in a feeling of the world spinning, which is called rotatory vertigo. And the reason you're feeling that is you can see my eyes are still. Nystagmus is an involuntary flick of the eyes, which you perceive as the world moving or spinning. And there's lots of different types of that. And depending on the type of nystagmus and depending on the other things that they're seeing, then they will be able to sort of suggest what the best way forward is for you. And it helps with the diagnosis. Does that answer your question? And if you've got other questions, please go back to your audiologist, whoever did it.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Debbie, for that. That's really helpful. Kevin, I think we're going back to you now.
Yeah, and I've got to say, Debbie, that was mindfulness plus plus plus. There was far more to this than I was ever aware of. In mindfulness, my past, I've done things such as Headspace app, and you've just gone so far beyond that, which is brilliant, because I think you've absolutely nailed it. A lot of the members and our experience, along the years has said, yes, of course, it's the primary symptoms that hit us and literally knock us down, but it's that response that kicks in that often becomes by far the bigger problem. And
secondary suffering,
talking as many airs is very much about acute attacks, and then there is a lower level problem with balance that continues. But to be honest, beyond the acute attacks, what was by far the biggest problem was the fear, the anxiety, the almost paralyzes you from carrying on with your normal life. And certainly for myself, the key, as well as obviously the treatment, medication, even surgery at one time for myself, what worked absolutely in tandem, in parallel with it, and the treatment alone wouldn't have worked, was this getting in control of one's mind, which there's so many different ways. Yeah, there's so many different ways to describe it, and you had that lovely slide that's showing befriending the dizziness. To me, it was one of combat, of overcoming.
And so that's always the way, and it's understandable. But there's this thing about what we resist and fight against persists. The more you try and fight against it, the more it fights
absolutely
back. And so you don't necessarily need to befriend it, but just build okay, I'm not responding to.
Yeah, the irony that I would say to all members and anyone watching this, very difficult to believe, and it is 18 years on, but myself and my life are far better for going through this horrible balance condition. And it may be very difficult to understand that when you're going through the most awful symptoms, but there is something about suffering and the challenge of that can bring out the best in us and probably make us better people for such as going through mindfulness. So there are definitely silver linings.
Yeah, and so I don't want to end on a negative note, but that's very inspiring, Kevin. And thank you. And I hope everyone will reach that point. I have to say, just for those of you who don't feel themselves currently better for having been through it, and I went through quite severe depression sort of 20 years ago. I would not on a personal level agree. I have learned lots, but I would have preferred not to have it. So if that is you, there's nothing wrong. If you do have Kevin's experiences, that is amazing. And we want to aspire towards that, but don't beat yourself up if you're not where Kevin is.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would add with that is at the end of one
a lot of
very long part of a journey.
And it is a journey, Kevin, isn't it? And,
absolutely.
I've just seen that someone's put, sorry to interrupt, but just before it goes, Michaela Burton's put a very useful definition of neurolingual processing, which again does overlap actually. We look at how you view something, how you are and talk to yourself, and how this impacts and how you respond to it. So whether you respond or react, altering perception can be really helpful in finding a more helpful response. So that's kind of a lot of mindfulness, isn't it? Sorry, Kevin, I just wanted people because I hadn't answered that one.
We've got to wrap up now, unfortunately. We're coming up to us. To everyone out there, remember the next meeting is October the 15th, so don't miss that one. I am sure we're going to be asking Debbie back because I feel we've only scratched the surface. I think there's so many things we could go into in probably more detail. But it's been fabulous, and thank you so much for giving your time
Not at
and
all.
your energy. And if everyone wants to switch their microphones back on, you are allowed to cheer and applaud for Debbie doing her work. So thank you very much. It's been
Let me know if
excellent.
I can help in any way.
It's been superb.
Hi, Deborah. Hi, Ella.
We will see you all hopefully in about 8 weeks, and all of you take care and do follow up on this mindfulness. It's really good stuff. But thanks ever so much, everyone. See you soon.
Ah.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye. 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 Bye.
Bye.